Welcome back to the lab, my friends. I'm your host, Bryce Prescott. I have to admit something. This is my second attempt at recording this episode. Yesterday, I sat down to try and record this. I got about 2/3 of the way through it, and it just wasn't landing for me. And it's because today's subject matter is very close to the heart, and I want to make sure that I'm very honorable with how I talk about it. It's something very personal, and it's going to be a little bit different. And it's not because I'm trying to make it different. It's because I'm in something right now that I can't talk about from a distance. I have to talk about it from inside of it. And it involves other people, and I got to make sure that I'm careful and respectful. And thankfully, when I've done that before, and when I've had other podcasting clients that have done that before, it always ends up being a more honest type of episode. And it's not one of these episodes where I've got it all figured out, because I'm still in the middle of feeling it. I'm still processing things. I'm still sitting in it. And thankfully, I can say that's usually where the truth comes out most fluidly. And so I wanted to basically start today's episode with that and let you know that this is important to me. So I ask for your tenderness and your consideration as I share some deeply important things about today. Last week, I talked about the power of behavioral science and metaphysical realities being basically the same thing. And I wanted to address a version of that in a way that was really personal for me, because I've used these exact same tools that I talked about last week, the same frameworks, the same principles, to build some of the best parts of my life, whether it be financial success, relational success at times, my health and fitness. And at the same time, I've used those same things, those same tools, to create situations that, unfortunately, I've had to walk away from. And this week, I'm sitting in one of those, probably the biggest one. So the context of what I'm sharing is that this week, my wife and I, 20 years, officially separated. We're in different homes now and living different lives. But I want to be really clear about something. There is no villain here. There is still an intense amount of care and love that we have for each other. There's deep respect. There's history with beautiful memories. We share a child. There's even endearment there. And this isn't one of those situations where I can simplify it and say, this person did this and that person did that. It's far more real than that. It's two people who, if we're being fully honest and open, got to a place where the truth wasn't being fully honored anymore. There was a stalemate. And that stalemate had been there for years. I wasn't getting the things that I had hoped and needed to live a grandiose life, and in fairness, she wasn't either. And when you really look at things, there's not a lot of confusion. There was just a decision. And so I've been sitting in this question all week, trying to bridge these things. How is it possible to be someone who is aware, who's done a lot of work on himself, who understands mindset, identity, manifestation, behavioral science, neuro-linguistic programming, all of these incredible things, and yet still end up in something that wasn't aligned? That's the real question. Because most people assume simply if I just do the work, I'll get the result. And while technically that's true, it's not how it actually works. See, the same tools that can build your best life, that can design exactly what you want, they can destroy it too, if you're using them from the wrong place. And that's the part that people don't want to hear. Manifestation, it doesn't create what you want. It amplifies what you are. And if what you are is not fully honest, unequivocally open, authentically yourself to yourself, you will build a life on top of something that can't last and that isn't true. So let me say this again in a different way. You can do everything right and still be building something that eventually collapses. Not because the tools don't work, but because they do work. Because you're using them from a place that isn't fully aligned. Most people think manifestation is simple. You visualize, you affirm, you take action, you handle the discomfort of the buffer, and then you receive in your physical reality to the thing that you were hoping for. And yes, that works, but it works either way. That's the part nobody talks about. The formula doesn't care if you're telling yourself the truth. It will amplify your alignment, but it will also amplify your avoidance. It will amplify your dishonesty. And that's where I had to take a deeper look at myself. I couldn't sit here and pretend like I didn't know what was actually going on. I wasn't unconscious. I wasn't asleep. I was aware. But I wasn't honest all the way through with myself. And there's a difference between those two things. Awareness without honesty is just a more sophisticated way of lying. I knew there were gaps. I knew there were needs not being met. I knew there were patterns that had been there for years that weren't helpful, that weren't healthy. But I also knew how to reframe it, how to be patient with it, how to see the good in it, to stay committed to it. And the crazy part is that all of those things sound healthy. They sound like the right move. But if they're not rooted in truth, they just become a way to stay stuck. You've heard me talk about my morning routine where I do breath work and visualization. And you've heard me talk about the lists of 100 where I'm designing the life of my dreams, where I'm choosing material items that I want to enjoy in my physical reality. And I'm writing down experiences that I want to have in that same physical reality. I was doing all that. I was visualizing a future. And that future that I was visualizing required something different than what was actually happening. It required something of me that I was ignoring. It required holding a boundary and a standard that I was unwilling to do at the time. I want you to consider what that means, how that applies to you. I was holding in my mind an image of what all of this could be while living something that would never be able to match it. And instead of asking myself, is this actually true? I was asking myself, how do I make this work? There's love here. There's beauty here. How do I do this? That's a completely different question. That's a completely different endeavor. And when you shift from that, when you shift from, is this true, to how do I make this work, you've already left the energy of alignment. Now you're in control. Now you're in force. You're forcing things. You're trying to engineer an outcome, as I was. And see, this is where manifestation gets dangerous. Not because it doesn't work, but because it does. You can use it to stay in relationships longer than you should. You can use manifestation to ignore the things that are obvious right in front of your face that you're just lying to yourself about. You can convince yourself that something is right when it's ran its course. You can build support and structure around things that aren't aligned. And because you're quote unquote doing the work, you won't question it. You will misinterpret the discomfort to mean something that it doesn't. Because at the root of it, you are unwilling to be honest with yourself that it just isn't aligned. Here's a few ways that can show up. You can manifest and create your life from a place of fear. If underneath everything, you're afraid of losing something, you will make decisions and build things to accommodate that fear. It'll look like commitment. It will look like loyalty. It will look like strength. But underneath it, still just fear. You can manifest and create things from a place of control, where you think to yourself, this has to work. That energy is subtle, but it is really heavy. Because now everything becomes about that outcome, keeping that thing. Whether it's a relationship or a belief structure, it ceases to be about evaluating the truth. It's about the control of needing it to look a certain way without understanding the bigger picture of what it would take to get the thing you actually want. And when you do that, you just stop seeing clearly. It shows up in very real ways, where you feel cloudy and anxious and disconnected and confused because you are still doing the work and you're still trying. You know, one of the other ways you can manifest in a way that's unsupportive, you can manifest from your identity. This is just who I am. We've talked about how your identity is a choice. Sometimes we let that choice become so solid that it just becomes a fact instead of something that's changeable. This is the life I've built. This is the version of me I've committed to being. And in those moments, instead of evolving, you're just protecting this thing that you're addicted to. You are defending a story, reinforcing the pieces around that story that are ultimately keeping you stuck. And the way that you know is that your growth is stagnant and you feel frustrated and you feel a temptation to sedate and to escape your own life because it's not making sense why you're doing the work but nothing's changing. Because you haven't put everything on the altar to have the life that you say that you want. Your faith in the reality that what is coming is far better than what you're experiencing is again just a representation of your fear. And that's what was happening with me. I wasn't confused. I was negotiating with the truth. And you can do that for years, especially when something's good, especially when it's good enough. But let me be clear about something. Good enough is not the same as being aligned. This is very personal for me to talk about because, as I said, ending that long-term relationship the way that we did, it's painful. There's love and deep respect, endearment, attraction still. But it wasn't aligned. And there was no way in our current awareness for it to become aligned if we maintained the status quo. Now, here's the good news for you. When you start to understand this, the difference, when you start to understand the power of honesty to your own alignment and acknowledging these things to yourself, that's where your power is. The moment you become deeply honest with yourself, everything will speed up. Clarity becomes instant. Decisions, clean. Energy turns. Because you stop trying to force life and you start responding to it. You become the designer, the creator. There is power in decision. When you finally make an aligned decision, even one that you're scared to make, but underneath it all, you know it's what's best. The world around you will shift to give you everything you need. I remember the moment that my wife and I finally decided that it was time for us to move on. We were standing in our master bathroom, discussing the details of a required move that existed from the current home that we were leasing. Our lease had expired. Our landlord had given us a deadline. And so it was required that we leave that house. And that had caused many difficult conversations to start between her and I. Conversations that were honest, that were kind, that were compassionate for each other, and that were aligned. And I remember that moment where I looked at her and I said, so this is the decision then. We are doing this. We are separating. And we agreed. It wasn't an angry moment. There was no spite, no villain, just agreement. It was as if both of us knew in that moment, with clear hearts and clear minds, that this is what was required. That we both had bigger ideas for the lives that we wanted to live. And as scary as it was for the possibility of not being together, that this decision was the right decision. And it was as if after that decision, things just started lining up that made it easier and more possible for this to be pulled off in the face of what before seemed very difficult. The decision created the momentum. The aligned decision created the accelerated momentum. And since that moment, her and I have had many times where in sadness we lamented the state of things. Because as I said, there's no villain here. There's two people that deeply love each other, but understand the actual aligned truth under it all. That the best choice was to go about it this way. And so we did. If you take anything from this episode, make it this. Before you decide to visualize anything, before you affirm anything, ask yourself, is this actually true for me? And then sit with it. Because you'll know. You will absolutely know. The noise will disappear. The emotions will point to the bottom of the truth, and you will know. Now, you might not like the answer. And you might not even have the courage in the moment to take action on that answer, but you will know. So I want to ask you directly. Maybe you're in your car, maybe you're on a walk, at work, maybe in the gym. I want you to stop for a moment and give yourself space and consider this question. Where are you negotiating with the truth? Where in your life are you staying because it's easier? Where are you trying to make something work instead of asking if it even should work? Everything I've talked about here on this show, behavioral science, metaphysical realities, the buffer, conscious pillars, these tools work. They are undeniable. There's plenty of evidence to show that they are real. That's not the question. The question is, are you using them from a place of truth or from fear? They will build your life either way, eventually. But you'll have to live in what you build. And that's where it can become dangerous. Like I said, this has been something that has been years in the making. I can't overstate it. There is no villain here. This was two grown adults making a decision from a place of alignment. Not out of fear of being alone or fear of loss. It was from an aligned place. And anytime we experienced those fears after the fact, and still do and probably will for a while, we at least can know and have reassurance that the decision was made from a place of alignment. And that offers a sense of energetic certainty that is usable to get through the challenging time. But it requires that question to be answered fully. Where am I negotiating with the truth? Where are you staying because it's easier? Where are you trying to make something work without asking even if it should? Friends, I appreciate your indulgence in allowing me to talk about these personal things today. This has been a big deal. I don't know the specifics of what the next chapter of my life looks like. But I do know that I feel thankful for having associated so much of my life with the beautiful soul that has been my wife of 20 years. And for the maturity and honesty that she has displayed in these decisions that have allowed us to make this decision in an aligned way and in an honest way, without any warfare, without any insults or being hurled, and with a commitment still to a loving relationship going forward that just looks different now because it's now aligned. My friends, this is the lab. It's all I have to say. If anything about this episode has resonated with you, I would ask you to share it. If any of these lessons matter to you and you'd like to reach out to me and talk about them, please do. I've learned a lot through this whole process, and if there's anything that I can impart that would help your experience and journey be easier, you have an invitation to try out the Lab group experience, my weekly coaching group, as well as see if coaching with me on a one-on-one basis would work. If you're seeking to expand your voice and to share a message with the world, I can help you with that too. by creating a platform and using podcasting as the means to do so. It's all about your own willingness to be honest with what's real for you. And that's where it starts. Now, for this episode, where it ends. My friends, my name is Bryce Prescott, and like I always say, until next time, take it a day at a time. I'll see you.